Hey guys, and welcome to a new video series for the database exam. And in this video we're going to be looking at the activities 1 and 2 of the May-June 2024 exam paper. So the first area that we're going to need to make sure that we look at and understand fully is the first part of the exam paper itself, where we outline a scenario. Now, in the scenario, you may find that there are nuggets of information that will support you later in the structure creation of your database tables. Things like hints towards things like ranges or areas where some tables might link to another. It's very well worthwhile spending the 10 minutes that the exam board suggests you take on this question or this area to actually understand fully what the database is going to require you to do. You should also refer back to this later in questions 1, 2 and even 3, just to make sure that you are getting all of the correct information displayed on your databases, so that when you do your screenshots, you're providing the right information to get you the best marks you can. So let's look at the scenario that we've got. We can see here that we're creating a database for a catering company of party services. The database needs to record information about the products and their suppliers, and each product belongs to a category, for example drinking, and we know that the product may be supplied by more than one supplier. The pack size and purchase price for a product may differ dependent on the supplier, and then we've got a nice little bit of information about telling us of a range in terms of when the payments are required by those organisations. So from here we should look at the data set that we've provided. You'll see in the data set that we've got a series of fields at the top. Now spend some time looking at these fields, because they can actually give us an indicator as to the tables that we need to create inside of our Access database. I would always suggest that you look for things like IDs that really give you an indicator to a table, because every table inside of a database has to have some form of unique identifier, and these are classed as IDs. So we can see quite clearly in this data set that we have actually got 3 IDs. These are the product ID, product category ID, and supplier ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to move these outside of our data set so that we can start to look at the rest of the fields inside of the data set. Now that these IDs are outside of our data set, we should look for fields that look like they would fit underneath those tables. So as you can see here, I'm moving out product description underneath product ID, product category under product category ID, and we're going to move supplier name and supplier email and days to pay under supplier ID. What we've got left are 2 fields. These fields don't necessarily fit into any of the tables. So for the time being, we're going to place them outside of the data set in a space away from the other fields. This is an early indicator that we're going to need to create a 4th table, but this 4th table may have something called a composite primary key. This is going to be something that we investigate when we start to move our foreign keys around into the other tables. A foreign key is quite simply a primary key taken from another table. This is going to allow us to create links between the tables and be able to link the information inside of them together. The first of our foreign keys is going to be the product category ID going into the product table. The next is our supplier ID and product ID going into a table with the supplier pack size and purchase price. Now if we reflect back to the scenario, we can see that there is an indicator as to the pack size and purchase price for a product may be different depending on the supplier. So as you can see here, the foreign key for supplier ID is going to be really useful. Also, what the product is will come from the product table. And again here we have this as a foreign key. However, earlier on we said that every table must have a unique identifier. Well, in this situation what we're going to do is create this composite primary key by using 2 fields, because we can't just use the supplier ID, because the supplier may appear multiple times, as may the product ID. So by combining the 2 IDs together, we should in theory be able to create a unique identifier that can act as the ID for this table. So we're just going to put the tables in order and show the relationships between them. First of all, we're going to show the link between the product category ID and the product table. Then from the product table to the sales table. And then from the supplier table into the sales table. And we can see that we've got our one-to-manys and our many-to-ones. If we look closer, we can see that we've got our composite primary key, which is supplier ID and product ID combined together. So we're now going to create our database. The first thing we need to do is select the new option in the left-hand side and then select blank database. Here we'll see that we're given a dialog box that will force us to save our database before we've even created a table. So scroll to the area where you need to store your database for the exam and then give it an appropriate file name that your database exam paper might ask you to save it as. So in this example, I'm just going to call it Part A DB. So once we're satisfied with that, click OK and then click on the option to create the database. At this point, it's worth noting that when you create the database, it automatically puts you into a table view to see the data. What we need to do is move into the design view by selecting the option for view. Here it's going to force us to save our first table, and in this we're going to call it TBL category. The prefix of TBL is required to represent the table, and you may lose marks inside of your exam if you don't do this. So I'm just here going to change the name of this field to represent one of our field headings taken from our table earlier on, and we're going to call this product category ID. Notice the data type is already selected to auto number. This is something that we might need to revisit and maybe change to number to solve a few problems that we might encounter if we mistype data. So we're going to move on to the next field name now, and we're going to put in the product category. The data type for this needs to be short text, and we're going to change the field size from its default of 255 down to 25. It is very important that you change the default size in your exam, as this shows consideration to the sort of information that's going to be stored with the inside of this field area. If you leave it as the default, you may again lose marks in the exam. So we're now going to save this table by right-clicking on the tab and clicking on Save, and then we're going to close it. We're going to move on to the creation of our next table. In order to do this, we're going to need to create a new table by clicking on the Create option, and then on the ribbon, we're going to go into Table Design. Notice when we go into Table Design, this doesn't have any ID pre-entered for us. It is a blank table. You must be very careful between the use of the Table Design and Table Options in the Create ribbon, as you may find that there are fields that are missing or that you need to change. So we're going to continue on with the development of this table, and we're going to be putting in the field name of supplier ID. We're going to select our data type to be number. Notice once I've selected number that this field is entered at the top of our heading area here. However, it's not selected to be a primary key. If we click on the little grey area, you'll notice that we get an option on our ribbon to choose for primary key. We can add this primary key in a number of different ways, and we'll show you this later on in the video. So moving on to the next field area that we need to enter, which is supplier name, we're going to choose short text, and again we're going to change the default 255 to 25. Then we have the supplier email. This again will be short text. Then we move on to the days to pay, and this is going to be a number. Now, if we refer back to our scenario, we've been asked to make sure that a record for a new supplier will not save if the supplier email is not present or in the correct format. So let's go into the value and the properties of the email. If we go to the validation rule, we want to force it that this value cannot have a no value in it whatsoever. So we're going to use the validation rule of is not null. As soon as we type that in and press enter, it will capitalize the first I and the first N of is not null. We're also going to add the option for an AND, which allows us to add another condition to our validation rule. In here, we're going to add the option for like. This will then allow us to put in the parameters of which we want our emails to be presented. So here you can see we have our speech mark, star, question mark, @ sign, question mark, star, dot, question mark, and then we're going to close the speech marks. What this validation rule does is allows us to tick off two of the requirements from our table structure and validation question in activity 2. We've made it that a record for a new supplier will not save if the email is not in the correct format, and also we've made it that a record will not save if the value is not present in the field. We're just going to add another piece of information just below the validation rule, which is a validation text. This is going to allow a user, if they do enter an incorrect value or they don't enter a value at all, to be displayed with a dialog box that pops up to them to say that they need to enter in a valid email address. I'm also going to change the field size to 25 because if we look at our dataset, we can see quite easily that we won't need that many characters in our email. We're going to move back to our table and we're going to look at days to pay. Now in the activity 2, it's asking us to make sure that a record will not save if the days are below the accepted range or above the accepted range. So what we're going to do is apply a validation rule that allows us to set this range. So we're going to put it is between 14 and 30. Notice as soon as we enter, the B and the A capitalize. As with the previous validation rule that we did, we can apply validation text for this one, and we're going to make sure that the message is easy to understand. So we're going to identify that the value must be between the value of 14 and 30. This information was also provided to us inside of the scenario at the beginning of the exam. So we're going to right click on the table and we're going to save it, and we're going to give the table the name of TBL as per our prefix, and then we're going to give it the name of supplier. I'm going to click on the X to close the table. I'm going to click on create on our ribbon, and again we're going to go to table design and jump into the heading area here for field name. This time around we're going to be focusing on the product table. So we're going to start off with the product ID. We're going to choose the data type for number. And as this is going to be our primary key, we're going to select the little block on the side and we're going to choose the option for primary key in the ribbon. And then we're going to move to the next field inside of our table, which is going to be the product itself. So product description. The data type that we're going to choose for this one is going to be short text. And as we've done before, we're going to change the default from 2.5. We're going to choose the data type to be number. And we're then going to go up to the tab. We're going to right click, save, and we're going to give it the prefix of TBL product. Once we've selected OK, we're just going to go up to the ribbon again, click on the X to close the table, and we're now going to finally create our last table by clicking on the option for create, table design. And this one is going to be for our sales table. So in here, we're going to put supplier ID, and we're going to choose the data type to be number. And we're going to put in the product ID. And again, this is going to be of the data type of number. And then we're going to put supplier pack size. And this is again going to be a number data type. And then we're going to be putting in the purchase price. And this is going to be currency. So we're now going to save the table, and we're going to save it as TBL supplier product. Notice I get this error message here to say that there is no primary key attached to this table. This is because we've forgotten to actually provide one. So in this instance, what you need to do is make sure you click on either cancel or no. We're then going to move over to where we've got supplier ID and product ID. We're going to select both of them and then choose the option for primary key. This has created our composite primary key because both of these IDs combined together should provide us with a unique identifier overall. We're going to right click and save, and now we should be able to save this table as TBL supplier product. We're going to click on close, and we're going to move on to the relationship creation between all of our tables. To do so, what we need to do is click on the option for database tools up in our ribbon at there. Once we select the database tools option, you'll see that it should give us the button for relationships. In the relationships area, we're going to be able to establish our relationships between the tables. As you can see here, I'm adding the tables from the add table option on the right hand side. If this isn't displayed for you, if you look on the ribbon, you'll see there's an option for add tables under relationships design. We're now going to drag our entities from one table into another. We're going to grab the product category ID from the category table and drag this over to the foreign key in the product table. It's very important that we select the option for cascade update and cascade delete and make sure we enforce the referential integrity between these. Next, we move the product ID into the supplier table, again ensuring we have enforced the referential integrity and the options for cascade update related fields and cascade delete related fields. And then finally we're going to move the supplier ID from the supplier table into the supplier product table, and again we're going to choose the three options we need to select. Notice all of our relationships are one to many, and this is represented by the 1 and the infinity symbol. So we're just going to go back into the product table to have a look at this. When we're in the product table, you can see that we have product ID, product description, and product category ID. If we don't know what this product category is, it's not going to be really easy for the user to know what the ID number is for that product category. So we can remedy this by using what's known as a table lookup. Go into Design View and select the option for data type. Then go down to the Lookup tab for the properties for the product category ID. Notice we have an option for display control. We're going to select combo box in this instance. Notice our properties has changed again. And now we can see table or query. We're going to select the row source and then click on the three little dots at the end. This puts us into a query builder where we're going to select the table that we want to get the information from. In this instance is table category. We're going to select the category ID and the product category. If we run this, you'll see that we have no records in the actual table at the moment, so we won't be able to test it at this instance. But what we're going to do is we're going to click on X to close and then click on Yes, and then this should return us back to the table properties. Notice that the row source now has a select statement that's going to select the information from the table category and show us the information from the product category ID and the category products. I want to show you here that we can see that it is bound to column 1 and only has column count of 1. We need to change this to 2. The reason that we change this to 2 is because we're going to have 2 categories available to us. You're going to click on Yes, and then we're going to open up and you'll see that we have a little combo box drop down, but we have no information in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the table for the category and we're going to enter some information into this. Firstly, I'm going to save the table product and go into category. You can see here I've shown our data set on the screen. We're going to enter in the information for product category ID and product category. The first option we have is drinking under ID number 1. Notice that there are multiple entries for this, but we are only entering it once into the table as we only need to see it once. Then we move on to our category ID number 2 for eating, and then category ID 3 for entertainment. Just because we've only entered drinking in once into this table doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to appear multiple times in other tables later. We're going to close that and we're going to go back to the product table. Now when we choose the option for product category from the drop down, we can see that we have all of the 3 options available to us. I'm going to move back into the design view just to show the fact that we have in our lookup the option for column count to be 2. This is important because we need to see both of the information areas. If we used to change this to 1 as I'm doing here, you'll notice that we're only seeing the first column ID number 1. But if we add the second number in there, we should be able to see both. But if you look at the bound column, we know that the ID is going to be entered into the text field as number 1 rather than the word drinking. Now I'm going to go through and add information to our tables, starting with product number 1, and this is going to be large white paper cups. I'm going to speed through this part of the video as you should be able to enter in the records yourself. Now that we've entered all of the products into our product table, we're going to move on to the supplier table. So we're going to close the product table and double click and open the supplier table. Now notice we have a supplier ID, supplier name, supplier email, days to pay. We're going to enter some values into here for supplier ID number 1, and we're going to use Carver Supplies. We're then going to move on to the email address where we're going to enter in carver@rud.com. Now notice I have an error. This is because we don't have the correct structure inside of our email here. So we're going to go back into the design view for this table. Now notice if I click on table or click anywhere off the table, because we have this error in here, it's not going to allow us to move forwards. So we're going to press the escape key twice to clear the record, and then we should be able to go into the design view. Let's look at the email area and go to the validation rule that we entered into our validation rule area. We can see here we've got the is not null and like, and if we look closely on the input that we've put on here, we can see that we've actually made an omission inside of our validation rule. I have accidentally missed the star at the end of the question mark on the last question mark. Once we add that, we're going to then jump back into the table view and see if we can enter in that record. So we're going to go in and add supplier number 1, supplier name Carver Supplies, and we should be able to now enter in the email of carver@rud.com without any error message popping up. Days to pay will be 30, and once we enter in 30 and move down, it should allow us to move on to the next record. So as we did before, we're just going to speed through this and add the rest of the records into this table. So now that we've finished entering in the supplier information, we're going to move on to the supply product. In this table, we have our composite primary key with the supplier ID and the product ID. We're going to enter the values into these. So we're going to start off with product number 1, which is supplied by supplier ID number 1. And this is going to be of a pack size of 1,000, and the purchase price is going to be £99. Now notice I have got them in a slightly different order to how they are displayed inside of our dataset. If you want to move this around, if you select the column and hold and drag it to the right, you can reorder these so it makes it for easier entry by yourselves. Also, we can expand the size of the columns if we want to see the headings themselves. So I'm just going to continue adding the data into this table here, and as before, we're going to speed through this. So now that we've got all of the fields entered, we're just going to close the table, and just because we dragged the fields around, it's going to ask us to save the order, and then we're done. I'm just going to reopen all of the tables so that we can see that the data inside them is appearing correctly. Notice we have these little plus signs next to some of the IDs. This shows the relationships, and if we toggle those open, we can see the associated records that are linked to that record, and so on. I hope you found this video informative and useful, and please like and subscribe to the channel, but also keep your eyes peeled for the next question, question 3 in the paper, where we're going to look at queries and reports.